So one quality that most of us don't like about ourselves as human beings is our human willingness to engage in war. War is common and it's familiar to the human race since the beginning of our story. And throughout all of our history, we have a tendency to kill each other. We have killed our own kind unlike any other species on our planet. And we, as human beings, engage in war unlike any other animals. Well, an occupation of the past was that of a blacksmith. And any of you who carry that last name of Smith can trace your family name back to a blacksmith someplace in your family tree. And the blacksmith was the person in the community who manufactured tools from iron, but also weapons of iron for war. And every blacksmith knew that there were two kinds of military arms, defensive and offensive. Armor to protect life and weapons to kill life. Armor was defensive and weapons were offensive. And everybody knew the basic difference between protecting life and killing life. And today we underscore that armor was to protect life and to preserve it. So when I think of armor, oftentimes I think of King Arthur and his court. And in the 14th and 15th century there are pieces of armor that are now considered great works of art. And we can think of Sir Lancelot and his armor, or maybe even a more modern context is to think of Game of Thrones and the armor that is worn by the Hound. They covered their bodies with armor to protect their bodies, and their sword was their offensive weapon. And everyone who ever wore a suit of armor knows to put on all of the pieces of armor to keep themselves protected. And you wouldn't have to persuade someone going into battle to make sure that they put on their whole suit of armor. And likewise, with the words from Paul this morning in our reading, he is advising and motivating us to put on the whole armor of God, to use all the resources we have to protect ourselves. And for us this morning, as we hear this, as Paul's suggestion, is for us to use the resources and guidance to protect ourselves from the cunning and baffling nature of addiction. Addiction has that ability to creep in and find those vulnerable spots, and then it grows and grows. It has the power to attack us where we don't have any protection, and especially when we try to go it alone. So Paul's words of advice can be used to motivate us about the wisdom of putting on all of God's armor. But Paul also isn't talking about just our own personal struggles and battles with our egos and with our own selfishness. And we who are here at Cumberland Heights certainly understand the struggles and the battles that ensue with addiction. But he isn't only talking about alcohol and drugs. He's addressing all the ways we separate ourselves from others, all those ways that we disconnect and separate from God, the ways that we self-medicate so that we don't have to look at how our own behaviors and choices impact others. As one writer puts it, who causes all the wars around us and around all of human history? Who causes the starvation when we have plenty of food and water available? And who has committed the genocide? Well, it certainly hasn't been God who has caused all of this, but instead, we can see those places where there is disconnection from God and how that then plays out in our world. And I know that this can be a heavy topic to talk about or to think about, but how we face these struggles is also a reflection of how we face the struggles in our personal lives. Because we often try to numb out what is uncomfortable or painful. We can create illusions that all is well with me or all is well with us, as long as I can keep the problems and the pain at a distance. We can create sanctuaries around us or within us with the hope of keeping out what feels dangerous. And when that doesn't work, then comes the geographical cure. And we also can become apathetic. We become apathetic to the world around us. We become apathetic to those in need, and we put on our blinders so we don't have to see them. We don't have to see what's happening with ourselves, and we can keep those things that are hard and painful and difficult safely away from us. But rather than running away from these struggles that are living within us and that are all around us, Paul offers a different alternative. He talks about living in the real world, and instead of hiding out, rely on the wisdom of God to guide us in how to live in the real world. And Paul lists 7 qualities, like those 7 pieces of armor that we can benefit from putting on and wearing. And he begins by advising us to put on the belt of truth, to be truthful and honest in our relationships, to be honest about the powerlessness over alcohol and drugs, and to be honest about what truly is unmanageable in our lives, and be willing to live truthfully and to know that we don't have to live a lie anymore. And then he writes to put on the breastplate of righteousness, right relationships, healthy relationships, forming good, healthy relationships with those around you, but also with yourself. Being willing to practice forgiveness and humility in your relationships. And then to put on the foot protectors of peace. Be aware of those times when you are looking for a fight, either a fight with yourself, with significant others, or family, friends, coworkers. Because oftentimes when we are feeling discontent in our own skin, it is easy to try to pick a fight with someone else or to try to project blame onto them and then discharge our pain and discomfort onto someone else. And instead, if we put on the foot protectors of peace, we get to try to work through those legitimate conflicts and be aware of those times when we're feeling agitated and uncomfortable with ourselves, so that we can take care of that by talking to someone, practicing self-care, practicing prayer and meditation to get ourselves recentered and regrounded, and to be a peacemaker in our relationships with others. And then we put on the shield of faith. And in that we learn how to trust God. And we learn how to trust the God of each of our own understanding. To trust that God is with you, to trust that God is within and around all of us, and to trust that God will strengthen us for every situation that we will face. The hard thing about faith is that you can't prove it, but we can still have faith because we recognize our experience that we have, and we can recognize how God is at work in our lives. We can see how God is at work in the lives of others and how God is at work in our world. Addiction is about disconnect. It's about not being able to trust your own thoughts and not being able to trust others. So recovery is about learning how to lean into God's will for your life. And it's also about learning how to trust that inner spiritual self. Not those random racing thoughts that try to talk you in and out of everything imaginable, but that core place within yourself that helps guide you into doing the next right thing, and then again the next right thing. That God space, which we often call the God-shaped hole, because we try to fill it up with drugs, with alcohol, with material possessions, with shopping, with food, with relationships, you name it. We have tried to fill it with other things until we finally come to that place where we fill it with the understanding of who and what God is for us. When we believe that there is something greater than ourselves that can restore our lives to sanity, then we can begin to trust that process. And while it may seem slow, we can trust that God's desire for us is to find health and wholeness again. And then we can put on the helmet of salvation. What a gift to know that you never have to take another drink or use another drug again ever in your life. That to me is finding salvation, to know that you never have to go back to that way of life. And there are 5 things that we talk about doing daily to help with that. Prayer and meditation, reading the literature, going to meetings, working with a sponsor, talking to someone in the program, doing service work, working the steps, putting those things into practice every day. And then put on the sword of spirituality. Be willing to develop your own spiritual life. How do you understand a power greater than yourself? What practices are you willing to be consistent with so that you can grow in your spiritual connection with God? And in that, to also grow in your relationship with self and with others. When we understand addiction as a spiritual disease, we also understand that the solution is a spiritual solution. The NA Basic Text shares that the only suggested guideline on finding a higher power is that this power be loving, caring, and greater than oneself. The 12 steps have 12 spiritual principles that are life principles. And when they are followed to the best of one's ability, they do allow for a new way of life. And those spiritual principles fall right in line with the armor Paul is writing about. Honesty, willingness, faith, truth, attunement, service, and reflection, just to name a few. And finally, to put on prayer and meditation. There's not a piece of armor mentioned with this 7th quality, but it's a very important quality. And we have on pages 86 and 87 of the Big Book, which is a great place to start learning ways to practice prayer and meditation. So when we wake up in the morning, we ask God to direct our thinking. Ask that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonesty, or any self-seeking motives. With that, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Concluding that period of time with prayer, that we will be shown throughout the day what the next step is to take, and to trust that we will be given whatever we need when we encounter that in the day. And asking for freedom from self-will. There is no right or wrong way to pray. For some, it might include using the 3rd step prayer. Others, it might be a reading from Just for Today. Others, it will be from Jesus Calling or the language of letting go. And for others, it still might be taking a morning walk that is filled with gratitude for the day and looking to see how God is at work in your life. The Big Book also has these words of wisdom. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful, and we ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves that we are no longer running the show. And when we retire at night, we review our day. Are there things that we need to clean up from the day? Do we need to practice honesty, humility, and seek out forgiveness? The 12 and 12 also stresses that emotional balance comes with prayer and meditation. That using those words from the 3rd step prayer, "Thy will, not mine, be done," will often enable us to clear a channel choked up with anger and fear and resentment, and instead it permits us to return to the surest help of all, our search for God's will, not our own, in those moments of stress. Paul suggests that we don't need to run away from the difficulties of life, just as the Big Book tells us that we don't have to avoid life to be in recovery. Instead, we can arm ourselves with the resources of God. We can strengthen and arm ourselves with the resources of this fellowship. Arm ourselves with the suggestions that are offered in the Big Book, the 12 and 12 NA books and books from your faith tradition. Go to meetings. Get involved in your home group. Get involved with the alumni here. Work with a sponsor and help out another alcoholic and addict. Doing those things helps to put on the whole armor of God so that you will be able to stand tall and your life will be lived to the fullest. and it will be happy, joyous, and free. Amen.